en route to intercept the aircraft.
Some of these war games and their details remain classified to this day. So is it any wonder that Donald Rumsfeld gave these warnings to military personnel the day after the attacks?
Finally, I'd like to say a word or two to the men and women in the defense establishment, most of whom deal with classified information. When people deal with intelligence information and make it available to people who are not cleared for that classified information, the effect is to reduce the chances that the United States government has to track down and deal with the people who have perpetrated the attacks on the United States and killed so many Americans.
Later in the day, weapons are found planted on several other planes. A U.S. official says of the hijackings, these look like inside jobs. Sources tell Time that U.S. officials are investigating whether the hijackers had accomplices deep inside the airport's secure areas. And then there's the story of Flight 23.
As bad as things were on Tuesday, there is a possibility that they could have been even worse.
There was some kind of an altercation involving three men described by a Port Authority of New York and New Jersey police source as Middle Eastern in appearance. They attracted the suspicions of the gate staff boarding that flight.
They had already gotten on the plane.
They're asked to leave the aircraft. They refuse to get off. The airline, following its normal procedures, according to this police source, calls the police, which immediately dispatch an emergency service team. So now you have a squad of heavily armed officers that are coming toward the airplane. And when they get there, the men have vanished. The gate staff can't find them.
It matches with the type of flights, the transcontinental flights that were hijacked in the other four instances. Another disturbing fact, if indeed there was an altercation and these men felt they had a case to make and were being treated unfairly, you can't imagine they would have disappeared from the airport. They would have stayed around and pled their case with the police.
It is extraordinarily unusual to have an airline, after it has boarded passengers, be so suspicious that it's going to ask these customers to get off the airplane. We got a phone call from a law enforcement officer who was on vacation, was in the United Airlines terminal at the time. As soon as he approached, they walked out of the terminal, and he looked over. He described them as Middle Eastern in both appearance and dress. Not sure what that means, but that was his description. He said when they left the terminal through the glass doors, he saw them meet a third man, and they then left.
Inside the bags, officials found Al-Qaeda instruction sheets, but false identification prevented investigators from ever locating the bag's true owners.
Coincidentally, the hijackers' identification would be found the exact same way.
There have also been reports of luggage that did not make the plane connection that appears to be tied to one of the alleged perpetrators, and this is being reported by the Boston Globe, and contained within the luggage were supposed to be Arabic language flight training manuals as well as videotapes pertaining to operating an aircraft.
Then we have that mysterious suitcase with all of the hijackers' names and all of this incriminating evidence that is supposedly taken by one of the hijackers to the airport. Why, if they are planning on a suicide attack, would they even bother to pack a suitcase? Or if they're just packing a suitcase to look like they're checking luggage, just throw clothes in there. Why put a Koran? Why put flight manuals? Why put all this incriminating information if it's supposedly going to get burned up? And then magically, amazingly enough, this one suitcase doesn't make it onto the connecting flight to New York. And it's just there in baggage handling, waiting to be discovered and found.
If the passengers on Flight 23 used false identification, why wouldn't the other hijackers?
Based on my personal belief and based on the events of that morning, the decision to halt airplanes, in all likelihood, probably precluded other attacks.
Atta and three others would do dry runs of the attacks before 9/11. Actor James Woods and others on the plane even filed separate reports to the FAA. Again, nothing was done.
I was on a flight. Without going into the details of what made me suspicious of these 4 men, although it would have been blatantly obvious to the most casual observer, I took it upon myself to go to the flight attendant and ask to speak to the pilot of the plane. The first officer came out. I reported to him that I felt that the 4 men, and I said, can you look over my shoulder and see who I'm talking about? And he said, yeah. I said, I think they're going to hijack this plane. I mean, everything they're doing, and I explained to him these details, which I've been asked to keep private until whatever jurisdiction, whatever trials may take place. Their behavior was such that that I felt they were going to hijack the plane. I found out later that not only did he make a report, but the flight attendant also made a report of my suspicions to the FAA. My friend Scott said to me, remember that flight you took in August? I said, yeah, I've been thinking about it all day. He said, well, maybe you should call the FBI. And I said, I'm sure they're being inundated, but I thought it over and I called the local office. 6:45 the next morning, I got a phone call that actually wakes me up, and he said, we want to talk to you about the flight that you took in August. I said, oh, did the manifest match of any of the flights yesterday and my flight? He said, well, we can't tell you that. I said, well, look, I'll get ready and I'll come down to the federal building. He said, we're outside your house. We'll just wait for you.
Wow, 7:15. So this is
6:45 in the morning. I said, and this is the only funny part of any of this, I said, how did you know where I lived? And there was a pause. He said, we're the FBI. We're the FBI, thank you. So they came in, and I said, look, I'm dying to know, were these the guys? And he said, well, we've had 36,000 tips in one day, and there's 2 of us, and we're going to be at your house all this morning, so you can do the math, but we can't tell you, So since then, I have identified for sure 2 of them as 2 of the terrorists, who actually were not on Flight 11, but one was on Flight 175 and one was on Flight 77. And I've been told unofficially, not by the FBI, but by someone else in actually a higher level of government, believe it or not, just through a coincidence, through a mutual friend, that all 4 of them were terrorists involved. As I explained to the FBI, they said, what was your first instinct? And aside from certain things like 4 guys getting on a transcontinental flight without any hand luggage, they said to me, what did you think these guys were? I said, well, I thought they were either 4 law enforcement officers or 4 terrorists, in that they had that thing that guys who are undercover or on a mission have between each other.
Just more evidence that the hijackers had intelligence ties. There were almost certainly other targets. Maryland's governor, on the morning of 9/11, stated that his police department had received threats prior to the attacks, not only against the targets that had been hit, but others.
That came in today? Pardon? You mentioned threats on Maryland facilities. Are these threats that came in today?
Yes. The head of our state police, Dave Mitchell, received a list of 11 sites across the country that were targets. Supposedly this list had been distributed prior to the explosions. Several of those sites were ones that were under attack.
Another target on that morning was Air Force One. Although it is never discussed, the perpetrators of the attack somehow got top-secret codes that morning.
And Brian, what is the credible evidence that Air Force One could have been a target? These planes were some distance from Air Force One, after all.
The excuse was that, quote, we do not discuss, we do not discuss intelligence information. Air Force One has been said to be a target in the past during President Clinton's trip to Bosnia during his first term, where they stopped in Aviano and switched out into 3 transport planes. Similarly, they were escorted by fighter jets, as they have in the past, while it is not routine. The White House insisting that the evidence was, and thus the zigzag flight path from Florida to Louisiana, the Air Force is insisting that the evidence is provable and credible that the aircraft and the White House were targets.
Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary, would be pressed on this issue.
If you have a threat to Air Force One, it seems as though you're raising an additional threat that perhaps we don't know about.
I'm sorry? Raising an additional threat?
Involving one of those planes, one of those 4 planes, Ari, is that where the credible threat, or can you say, are we talking about something totally different?
You're asking me, in essence, what the source of information is. And I think the American people...
No, how have we accounted for those 4 planes and what their targets were? Is there, which by deduction you would assume there is something else that we're talking about targeting Air Force One? make that assumption?
I'm not going to lead you any further as to speculating about what was the nature of the threat to Air Force One. But as I indicated, and I'll say it again, it was real, it was credible.
Planes that we have accounted for.
I'm just not going to speculate about the nature of it.
On September 20th, 2001, WorldNet Daily would report much more regarding the threat. The terrorist message threatening Air Force One was transmitted in that day's top-secret White House code words. As the clock ticked away, the Secret Service reached a frightening conclusion. The terrorists had obtained the White House code and a whole set of top-secret signals. This made it possible for a hostile force to pinpoint the exact position of Air Force One, its destination, and its classified procedures. In fact, the hijackers were picking up and deciphering the presidential plane's incoming and outgoing transmissions. In the week after the attacks in New York and Washington, more hair-raising facts emerged. The terrorists had also obtained the code groups of the National Security Agency and were able to penetrate the NSA's state-of-the-art electronic surveillance system. They seemed to have at their disposal an electronic capability that was more sophisticated than the NSA.